Today I'm making some Hippie banana bread, and this was a recipe from my 50 recipes in 50 days ebook when I went live for 50 days in a row, and that was where I originally published it, I think, or maybe somewhere else. But anyway, it's a classic recipe of mine, and it's a good way to use bananas, but it's also something that everyone seems to like. Whenever I made it, everyone just loved it. So, and it's made with good ingredients. So today, some of the ingredients I'll be using that make it really good are special flours. Like I have Emmer whole grain flour from Barton Springs Mill, some almond flour, and those are the two major flours. In the past, I've used organic whole wheat pastry flour, and you can get that from Whole Foods. But I'm trying my Barton Springs Mills flours because I have so many of them, I want to find ways to use them. And the Emmer flour has a really good taste, and it's made for cakes, cupcakes, cookies. And then of course it also has some other great ingredients like almond butter, date syrup, apple butter, and some ground flax seeds mixed with water to make kind of like an egg-like texture. And then I'll be adding dark chocolate chips and some walnuts. I get my chocolate chips from El Rey, Chocolates El Rey in Stonewall, Texas, which I love their chocolate chips. They're vegan and they have just the richest, most delicious flavor. So I think we'll start by preparing the rest of our ingredients, which includes 3 ripe bananas. And you know, speckled, spotted bananas are the best for this kind of a thing. I don't like it when the bananas get real black on the outside and they almost have, to me, kind of an odd taste. So I like them when they're about like this, where they're starting to get that dark outside, but they're more like speckled than anything else. And they're kind of medium-sized bananas. If you have gigantic bananas, then you might want to measure out the amount. I think I have 3 bananas, but it equals a cup. So if you have the biggest bananas in the world and you think it's going to work, it may be too many bananas. So we want to make sure that we have the right amount. And I know this size bananas will make about a cup of bananas. So that'll be the right amount. And we're going to be mixing these bananas with other things. So, you know, it doesn't matter if they're perfect right now. And since these are nice and ripe, but they're not so soft and ripe, they don't, looks like a piece of walnuts in here. They don't look, you know, they're not mushing into nothing that fast. And so we'll mash them up some more when we add our other wet ingredients, but for now they're good. Okay, so then also in my recipe I have walnuts and chocolate. And I didn't get my knife, so I'm gonna pause for a second and get my knife. Got my knife, and now I'm gonna chop up these walnuts. I don't want them too small, but they're a little too big, even though they're called walnut pieces. The pieces are way too big to put in our banana bread. It's about half a cup, maybe a little bit more. I probably put a little bit more because I like it to have a lot of walnuts, but you can use just half a cup. So that's good on those. I'll get those in my bowl here. And then the chocolates, the El Rey chocolates come in these kind of discs like this. So they're not chips. They're just in kind of larger discs. And so I have to kind of chop those up because those are too big to go into the banana bread. They might be okay in something where you don't mind the chocolate to be big, but that's a little too big for this recipe. If you don't want to use chocolate, you can use dried fruit. One of the standards I've used is cranberries. You can, to get that out of the way, you could use raisins, whatever. Anything you like. I try not to use the dried fruit that's dried with sulfur dioxide to make it keep its perfect color. I just don't like that additive, so I don't use those. So organic raisins and other fruits like that are the ones I use. Okay, so now we got that done. And then we'll start with our dry ingredients. And I'll move these over to the side because we don't really need them right now. And we're going to start with the dry ingredients. Get this chocolate off my board. And wipe my hand off a little bit. So like I said, I've already measured out some of the things. I have a cup and a half of my Emmer flour. This is a Barton Springs Mill flour. I have half a cup of almond flour. And then I've already measured out everything else. I have a teaspoon of baking powder. And in my original recipe, I used only baking soda, but I changed it because I like baking powder better than baking soda. But I did use 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda, a teaspoon of salt, a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and those are the dry ingredients. And then I like to whisk up the dry ingredients because that way they get combined. Back in Grandma's day, we used a sifter, but I'm not using that. I'm just using my handy whisk. Oh, I got some company. What are you doing? She's getting into the house plants. Dogs. Okay, so once this is well combined, then I'm going to mix up the wet ingredients. So the wet ingredients, and how I'll tell you the changes too as I go along. The only change there was I changed added baking powder instead of baking soda, and then and I added less baking soda than in my original recipe. So some of you who have my original recipe, you may wonder, well, what did she do differently? And then in the wet ingredients, those are almost the same. I have my bananas. This is the mashed up bananas, and then I have some apple butter, 1/2 cup. And what I try to do here is I want to use apple butter that doesn't have sugar in it, okay? So find an apple butter that's sugar-free, and Whole Foods has one, other places have one. If you don't have one, then this time I used one that has some sugar in it because that's all I had here. I didn't have the sugar-free one. So in that case, I had the added sugar one. But if you want to make it no sugar other than date syrup, then get one that's sugar-free, and you can get that from Whole Foods. And this is 1/2 cup of almond butter. And this almond butter is just your plain old grocery store almond butter. This one was from Whole Foods again, just their regular creamy almond butter. Nothing in it but almonds, a little bit of salt, not much. Then we have the flax egg, which this is a change because before I used aquafaba, which was from chickpeas, the liquid from chickpeas. But I've since started using more of the ground flaxseed meal mixed with water. So that's what I have for this one. And then here's my 1/4 of a cup of date syrup instead of maple syrup, just because I think dates are just better for you in general, more nutritious. It's not coming out of there all the way. Not refined. So if you're going to use something sweet, just use dates. Take my word for it. Okay, there we go. And then I left my vanilla flavoring out by accident. I just didn't get it, but I might add it next time. But it doesn't make that much difference. If you want to add some vanilla extract, add 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. It won't really change anything, not much. So then what I did differently is I used to add maple syrup instead of date syrup. And then I also had an extra 1/2 cup of cane sugar or turbinado sugar or organic cane sugar or some kind of added sweetener. But over the years, I decided that I really didn't need that extra sweetness. What are you guys doing? Got all 3 dogs behind me. They see us in here. My husband's filming. I'm cooking. And they're right behind me checking everything out, of course. So then I add the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients together. And anytime you have something with flour, don't overmix it because then you develop the gluten in the flour and then you end up with something kind of tough and not that good. You don't want that. It's going to be kind of thick. It's intended to be that way. There's no liquid in it, so it's going to be on the thicker side. The only moisture comes from the apple butter, and the bananas have a lot of wetness, so it's kind of a thick batter, but that's okay. That's how we want it. And then now that that batter is pretty well combined, we can go ahead and add our walnuts and our chocolate, mix it up a little bit more. Then I'm ready to put it in the loaf pans. All right, make sure that you go all the way under so you don't have any dry spots because those will show up when you start to eat it. Nobody wants dry spots in their banana bread. All right, so that's it. It's all mixed up. It's nice and thick like it's supposed to be. And now we have to get it into the loaf pans. So what I'm doing today is I'm using mini loaf pans. I'm using 4 of them. And what I did to line them, because I don't use shortening, I don't use cooking spray, I just use a pan with a liner. And how I've done that is I've taken parchment paper and I crush it up. And what that does is it makes it easy to then stick into the loaf pan, because when it's straight, it just won't go in there without a lot of effort. But when you crinkle it up, it just kind of molds to it, so it works really well. And I've done that on the other 3 and now this one. Now it's not going to look perfectly straight on the sides. It's going to be a little crinkly. But you know, I'm not making something for appearance. I'm making it because it's a homey thing. It's a flavorful thing. So then I just have to fill the loaf pans with the mixture. I try to do it as evenly as possible. Sometimes if I'm really getting accurate, I'll get on the scale, put it on the scale and weigh it, but I'm not doing that today. And they're not going to be gigantic loaves. They're going to be on the small side, which is good. You know, I don't want them to be huge. That one needs a little bit more, so I may have to borrow from the other ones. But you get the picture. It's kind of a process to get everything divided equally. So I'm going to keep working on this, and then I'll come back in a minute when they're all evenly filled and get them in the oven. They're all evenly divided. It turned out to be about 11 ounces each. I'm going to get them in the oven at 350 degrees. They're going to go in there for about 25 to 30 minutes. And I will be back when they're ready. We'll get them out and see how they are.